It feels like a more optimistic Per on this CMD than the one in September. I know you're always optimistic, but less stressed now than then. No, so as Per alluded to, I think we at Voi, we have never felt as convinced and comfortable with one, that our industry, the urban mobility, micromobility industry, would be very big and very profitable, and two, that Voi will win. For a few reasons. One, we see that our products now are becoming really good. I mean, the e-scooters have been good for a couple of years. Now we've also cracked the e-bikes, so we have a really good e-bike. The e-bike market is at least as big as the e-scooter one, just less penetrated. Two, regulations have matured a lot. We don't see the same pain points as we saw in the early days around parking, around over competition, over supply, and so on. Three, competitive pressure has come down a lot. What we thought would happen in the first 2, 3, 4 years took 5, 6, 7 years, but now there are very few competitors left. And the fourth thing is around profitability. You will see today that we have delivered on our plan on profitability, even over-delivered, which makes us, and I know Per as well, we sleep much better in the nights now. Yeah, and I'm Fredrik, CEO of Voi, also founder, and Matthias, CFO and Deputy CEO, is here today as well, and will join during the Q&A. So this is really our vision. It comes from us thinking that transportation in cities all over the world, perhaps even more in the US, but also in Europe, is quite messed up. We give a lot of space to cars, 50-60% to parking spaces and roads and so on. They are bad for the environment. They are dangerous. They are involved in pretty much all fatal accidents. That's more like on the philosophical, ideological level. What we see also is that all European cities between 2030 and 2035 have said they will prohibit combustion engine cars in city centers. Stockholm is actually the first big city out from 31st of December this year, when they are prohibiting gas and petrol cars in the CBD district, so in the very center of Stockholm. But most other European cities are following now over the coming years. And then we think a better solution for urban transportation is light electric vehicles, such as the ones you see on this page. We started with e-scooters, now e-bikes, but we have built a platform that's very vehicle agnostic. So the software, data, and operational platform can handle any vehicle. So we can tap into other vehicle form factors and combine that with public transportation, with BlaBlaCar, with ride hailing and so on. So people shouldn't need to have and own their own car when they live in a city. If you don't live in a city, like I grew up in Östersund, far up in the north, then you of course need a car. But I think in Sweden it's 60-70% of the population is living in cities. And now it says over the last 5 years, now it's actually 6 years. So we founded Voi in 2018 together with VNV and some of the Avito guys, who were the first investors. Now we have done more than 250 million trips in more than 100 cities all over Europe. We focus on Northern, Western, and Southern Europe. We draw a line kind of currently from Finland, east of Germany, so focus on the richest countries in Europe. We're number one. We have more than 100,000 vehicles in operation now, and we think we're just getting started. So the e-scooter market today, we've seen that the number of e-scooters is not growing a lot over the last years. It's rather consolidating. But we see that on the e-bike side, there is only, I think, a fifth or a fourth of the number of e-bikes out in European cities compared to e-scooters. At the same time, as we know, that many user groups, especially older users, prefer the e-bike. And we also know that city politicians look upon e-bikes in a more favorable way than e-scooters because it's bikes. While e-scooters is more something new, something techy, a bit scary. So we expect a lot of growth on the e-bike side over the coming years. The team has been around for quite some time now. So it's me, it's Matthias, CFO, who was CFO at Modern Times Group and Veoneer before. Antonia is leading HR. She was leading HR at EQT, Bambora, Thomas General Counsel, 30 years of general counsel experience. Hans and Christina leading the markets organization together with Stefan in Germany. So most people now have worked with each other for 4 or 5 years, and the company has existed for a bit more than 6. So productivity and just like how fast we can work together and make decisions have just grown exponentially. So we feel very, very good about the team now. On the financial side, we had massive growth from really 2019, 2020 to 2022, a bit slower in 22 and 23 since we did a big turnaround from heavy focus on growth towards profitability and cash flow generation. And that, of course, shows up on the top line numbers. From next year, we will start to grow a lot again because now we have cracked both the gross margin side, as you see here. We've improved the gross profit margins from 31% in 2020 to 49% in 23. We continue to increase margins even more this year than what we did last year, at the same time as we have cut even more costs. So we're getting proper operating leverage. And as you see on the right-hand side, group EBITDA margin for the last 12 months was 7%. And when we look at the full year of 2024, it will be significantly higher. And as Per alluded to as well, we aim to be EBIT positive, EBIT profitable. And that for us is, since EBITDA is a good proxy for operational cash flow generation, so then we're starting to get quite some buffers with which we can invest in more vehicles, raise asset-backed debt financing for the vehicle side and so on. So that's very, very hopeful. I don't know if I need to talk that much about this anymore, but the early days of the industry, there was a lot of, I would call it almost chaos. So much venture capital flown in, quite a few bad operators, no regulations, so issues around parking, safety, antisocial behavior, and so on. I think now most of those things, especially when we talk to politicians, are fixed, which has put our industry in another light than where it was, the first years when it was a bit chaotic. The number of competitors is down to, as we see it, it's really only 2 real competitors, then a few very small ones. And that, of course, also helps. Then it's easier to collaborate and work with cities instead of just fighting each other, bloody in discussions with cities, with users, and so on. So I think you should know there has been a lot of bad skeptical news about our industry over the first years. You will see a lot of positive news this year. You will see us and Lime coming out as profitable, perhaps someone else as well. You won't see a lot of bad media around parking issues, safety, and so on. So I think the tide is turning. We hit some kind of bottom last year when some of our competitors went bankrupt. They were forced into mergers. But you will see a lot of positive news over the coming years. Eventually, Lime IPOing as well, late this year or next year, they've said, and they will come out with good numbers. So a lot of the critique we got the first years, most of those are really fixed now. The first one was around us obstructing, taking up public space, cluttering streets. If you go out now in Stockholm, or in most of our cities, we have designated parking spots in Stockholm. We have got, I think, 4,000 from the city. So every bike rack is a digital geo-fenced parking zone now in Stockholm, which is great. Lifetime of the vehicles, the latest vehicles last 5, 6, 7, 8 years. So we have vehicles out now that we put on the streets in 2020, which are fully depreciated, but still in very good shape. And that's the 2020 model. The 2024 model is, of course, 1, 2, 3 steps more advanced and more robust. Gross profit we talked about, target audience and user groups. Sometimes I hear it's only kids using them. That's not true. The main user group is 25, 34 years old, young professionals, one of the user groups with the highest purchasing power that's out there, which is a very good user group to grow with. And what we also see is that every year, when old people stop using mobility at 70, 75, 80, 85, they haven't been very eager on using our type of service. But then 15, 16, 17, 18-year-olds start to use mobility, and they are very eager to use our service. So we see a positive demographic kind of tailwind through that. E-scooters are safe. We have gotten the incident numbers down, so slight to serious accidents from it was around 55, 60 per million kilometers ridden in 21. Now in April it was down to 20, so we cut it with 67%. Better products, more education, better roads, and so on. And the last one here, that e-scooters and e-bikes don't replace cars. They do. When we go out and talk to our users, we see that both, they both answer that they use cars less, but also that they combine Voi with public transportation to a very large extent. In Stockholm, the number is as high as 60%. In some German cities, even higher. Yeah, I've already talked about the market, so I won't go into this. The only thing is we moved from an unregulated environment to a more licensed, tendered, regulated environment, which we have been advocates for since day one, because that sets more clear playing rules, and then we can invest longer on a longer time horizon and work together with the cities and other operators on public transport and so on, compared to in the early days when it was Wild West. And as a consequence of both us having invested and built both user products but also city products, so to handle things such as parking, as I talked about, but also that the number of competitors have come down. When we applied for Paris in 2019, 2020, there were 25, 28 applicants. Then Paris had all the power. They could tell us, do this, pay that, you should be happy for being here. But now in many of the recent ones, then there are only 1 or 2 competitors left. So then the power balance shifts towards us instead. And also, of course, drives our market share up even more. Because most big cities, they want 2, perhaps 3 operators. And when there are only 2 or 3 operators left, it makes it easier. I think pretty much last one. So we started this turnaround in 2021 where we saw that capital started to become more expensive. So we've been through 3 major reduction in force processes where we have both taken out a lot of G&A cost, but also halved the number of FTEs in the company. So we were a bit more than, I think, 450, 470 white collars end of 21, early 22. Now we're down to around 200. So we've taken out pretty much 60% of the workforce, but managed to keep most of the high performers. So the talent density is just much higher now. And people have worked with each other for a long time now, similar to the leadership team. So OPEX is under control now. And we also see that with every vehicle model, so this is a slightly complicated graph, but it says V3X was the vehicles we put out in 2020, V5 was in 2022, now we're on V7. And we see that with every vehicle model, and when markets are going from free markets to licensed and tenders, we see that the net revenue per vehicle per day, this as a percentage of the Voi average last year, is going up. So it's good for us with new vehicle models. That's why we want to invest in a lot of new vehicles next year. And it's also good for us when we move from this unregulated free market to more regulated, clear playing field, longer investment horizons. So now, we're really aiming at 2027, 2028 now, where we at least want to double the size of the company and generate significant both cash flows and EBIT. So we continue to work together with cities and regulators to kind of stabilize and build a great regulatory environment. We will continue to see some consolidation, but now most consolidation is done. There will perhaps be 1 or 2 bigger deals more, but most of it is done now. And there won't be, I can kind of bet Dennis' fishing hat that there won't be an incumbent or newcomers into this space because no investors want to fund and catch up on the 500, 600, 700 million we have invested and the 2 billions that Lime has invested and the 2 billions that Bird invested before they went bankrupt. Build out with new vehicle form factors. We talked about the e-bikes. Over the coming years, we will focus on e-scooters and e-bikes, perhaps try out some more form factor. And the fourth one, as I said, I'm very convinced that if VNV has valued us at, I think, around $400 million now, or just below, I wouldn't sell Voi for less than 2 billion. Thank you. Ni kör handmick då.
Yes, you don't have one. Okay.
Ni kan ju dela.
Yeah, sure. The red hot seat here.
Exakt.
Good. Thank you for that presentation. We're going to run a Q&A. I'll kick off with some questions, but please, everyone in the room, feel free to just raise your hand, and Katarina will hand out the microphone. So we thought we'd start off with one question that we ask all of our companies here presenting here today. If you look back at the last 24 months, what are your biggest learnings and takeaways from going from hyper growth to profitable growth?
All right. Hi. Thanks. Happy to be here. Thanks. I mean, there's so many things that you learned. I think for me, I think the major thing is that you can always act faster and more, because when it starts to become apparent what needs to be done in a company, time is not on your side, so just get on with it. I think then the second thing I think is also that moving a young, ambitious organization from having abundance of capital and the sky's the limit to something more that resembles kind of the hard work of a normal company, so to speak. It's a huge undertaking to bring everyone with you on that journey. That should not be underestimated, I think.
I agree.
Good. Yeah, feel free to raise your hand if there are any questions. Otherwise, I'll go ahead with one more here. So, what you touched upon this earlier in the presentation, but what are you hearing today from regulators, cities, municipalities that's different from what you heard in 2018 when everything started, so to speak?
In 2018 and 2019, the conversations were very much around, will this be allowed? Should this be allowed? Now the conversations are very much about, okay, we want this in our city. How can we set a 5, 7, 10-year plan? Similar to, because city planning is like inherently slow. It takes a long time. But now we're rather part of the conversations with public transport, like city planning. They ask us for input using our data on road quality, on where to put bus shelters, because we have so much data. So it's much more constructive, and we have access to the actual decision makers. Like here in Stockholm, the traffic mayor is very, very engaged. Tomorrow, I'm meeting the mayor in London, Sadiq Khan. He cares about transport in London, and he probably did that before as well. But then we were not at the table.
I think we had one in the audience.
So a lot of the growth is coming from bikes. When do you think you'll have a sense of the unit economics of the bikes as it relates to the scooters?
Very good question. And for those of you who don't know, I think Mr. Richman here is a board member of Voi. I think if you go back a couple of years, I think the unit economics of bikes were not really there. I think the sturdiness and the total cost of ownership of the bikes were not really as strong. I think what you see now with the last 1-2 years, and particularly the new generation of e-bikes we put out this year, we get unit economics to be in good cities as strong as the e-scooters. I think we're still now looking at, of course, the unit economics and cash flow generation in relation to the capex, because they're slightly more expensive. But I think over the long term, there should be no difference between bikes and scooters.
Yeah, and to add to that, I met some people in New York a few weeks ago, which are big investors in VNV, and I said, you're not allowed to hate on bikes. You're allowed to hate on scooters, but not on bikes, because bikes is kind of holy. It's sacred for Europeans and European politicians. which means there were quite strict, tough regulations against e-scooters in the early days. But on bikes, we don't see that, because if you say to a politician like, we have 10,000 bikes to put out in your average size city, do you want them? They would say yes. While if you say we have 10,000 e-scooters want to put them out in your average size city, they would say hell no.
I think one additional comment there, I think, to touch upon what Frederick said, I think one of our UK recent wins in Solent, Southampton, Portsmouth, there actually the city is paying us to deploy bikes. So the whole tide is turned, and I think that dynamics we will see increasing more over time as well.
Thank you, Georg.
Yeah, so a couple of questions from me. So firstly, on the asset-backed financing of the fleet, if you can describe that in a bit more detail, and also with the fleet expanding next year at a faster pace, will that be completely asset-backed, or how will that look?
It's a good question. I think if you look at the financial profile, these assets should have no problem whatsoever, of course, to get proper asset-backed financing. I think what you still see is a perception of the industry. Fredrik talked about, the Birds of the world and the Tiers of the world that pretty much went bankrupt. So I think there is still a level of, perception around the industry that credit people are a little bit concerned about. So I think it's TBD if we manage to do proper asset-backed financing for this year or for next year's capex. But the cash flow generation is amazing. I think you didn't see it here on the slides, but when you put a scooter out in one of these tendered cities, it takes less than half a year to get the capex back for that scooter. So that's how strong cash generation we have. And sorry, what was the second question?
Other questions. So first we're obviously seeing some consolidation, some competitors going bankrupt. So you talked previously about maybe being active yourself in consolidating the industry. Is that now off the table? And then the last question is, we've seen the margin trajectory both on, with central costs and also the gross margin coming up. Where do you think the sort of steady state margin can be in this business?
Well, if you take the first question, as you see the financial profile and operating leverage that Fredrik talked about, I think for us right now, it's a matter of scale. You can add twice as many vehicles and you don't really have to add any fixed cost at all. So I think we spent a significant amount of time last year trying to look at acquisitions, so scale acquisitions. I think most of those or all those assets were pretty bad shape, I think. Way over leveraged and not very well run. So we basically decided together with VNV and the board and said let's not go forward with those because the dilution would be huge and pretty risky transactions as well. We're still looking at consolidation, of course, but right now I think when competitive pressure has gone down so much, the slower pace and step-by-step approach is probably most value creating. There may be some small bolt-on acquisitions that we may do over time, but in strategic areas where we want to grow. And on the last question there on margin long term, I think, given that now markets become more and more protected, it's very difficult to, I used to be a CFO in listed companies, and so putting out some kind of long-term guidance and so on is always tricky. So I'm a little concerned about that because you don't really know. But if you look, right now, we only in this scale, our profitability is going to be pretty strong. Gross margins, I think we are right now at 50%. They should be north of 60, maybe up to 70% over time. And EBIT margin, there's no reason why we shouldn't get to 20% plus EBIT margins. But obviously, the future is the future, so it's difficult to write that in stone.
I think we had a question over here.
Thanks a lot. Just on this rather positive outlook, what kind of visibility do you have in terms of maybe not regulation, but on upcoming cities that you can expand to and so on. So to give us some kind of more concrete visibility into the ambitions.
The reality is there is no shortage of cities to expand into or within. The shortage now is more vehicles. We could easily, probably almost double the fleet size in existing countries, regions, with some small expansion that we could do from the existing countries. That would mainly be in Central Eastern Europe then, and potentially, Middle East.
I mean, there are really two dimensions at play here. I think first dimension is that there is a lot of cities now that get less and less competitors. So Limes and Tears of the world, they're pulling out of cities where we're number one. So you need to kind of supply more for that loss of that loss of supply in the market. And then you have the underlying trajectory of growing demand as well. And I think connecting also to what Per said, I think it may be difficult to see that this is a network effect business, but I mean, the reason why we're number one in, I think, around 85% of all the cities that we are present in. And one of the reasons for that is that we have found the formula of how to be number one in rides market share. And when you're number one in rides market share, then you get the organic flow of the fleet to rebalance organically to match supply and demand in the cities. And that's extremely difficult for someone else to come in. I mean, in Stockholm, I think we have 70% rides market share probably, or even more in some days. And it's almost impossible for someone to come in and break through that. So even without a tender 1-2 players now, it's in its essence 3-player market here in Stockholm.
Yeah.
And we have a very strong organic, strong position.
And I now need to catch my plane to get to the Mayor of London. So Matthias will take care of you the last 10 minutes.
Are there any more questions?
For Fredrik?
For Fredrik, okay. If not, Fredrik, here's a fishing hat you betted. $2
tack.
billion company. Remember that?
Tack. Tack.
Yeah, cool. No, so just curious, since you're indexing much more heavily on bikes ahead, and that's going to be a key driver of growth, it'd just be interesting to hear a bit more about the bike strategy going forward. So is it more about kind of building beachheads in new cities and winning new tenders and new licenses because bikes are an easier sell than scooters, and maybe that's makes it an easier sell on the political side? Or is it more about deploying in the existing footprint, and then I presume there's maybe a little bit of cannibalization? It'd just be interesting to hear a little bit about the bike strategy ahead.
It's a good question. I think what we found so far is that the profitability of cities are highly dependent on this, specific conditions. If you have a very strong e-scooter city, obviously e-bike may be a little bit tougher. So right now it's a combination of, existing cities where it makes sense, and sometimes, like in the Solent, I think the city wanted to have a multimodal tender. So there's one part, and the other one is that there are great cities out there that could handle just going in with bikes first. But right now, given that it's all about capital allocation right now, because if you have, if you raise debt to buy vehicles, obviously you need to figure out so that the return on that investment is optimized as well, given the overall trajectory we're on in terms of profitability.
Seems like, oh yeah, one final question.
Sorry. What's the pathway to exit?
You tell me. No, I think that this will be a publicly listed company in a few years' time. And at least that's what we're working towards, I think. If there's something happen on the way there, I think we would obviously look at all those things. But I think that's the mindset we should have. We're trying to build a very robust, sustainable, profitable company. And then once you've done that, you have the optionality. If you don't do that, exit discussions are pretty, unimportant conversations. It's wishful thinking then. I saw that Mr. or Jake, you had something. I'm shivering a little bit right now.
No,
But
it's fine. Just back to the question about the bikes versus scooters. So it's driven by the return on capital balance, the tenders and the cities you're approaching. But if you had your choice, if you just had a pile of money to spend on those two types of vehicles, like, and given sort of where you want to end up a few years from now, how would you split the different, or how would you split the mix between the two?
That's a good question. I think ambition-wise, we would like to expand on bikes a lot. I think the restriction right now is access to capital, and I think that's you would, if you had the possibility to invest a lot more in bikes with slightly lower profitability, we would probably do that any given day. I mean, just to look at London is one of the best, London and New York probably is the two best city bikes, bike cities. And I mean, Lime, they did a great job in London, I think, for those of you who've been there. Unregulated, so they will be regulated, so they will probably not enjoy this for that long time, but they have done a great job there, and then they're making a lot of money in London. So there are some cities that are really good to be in.
Seems like that's it. Thank you very much, Matthias and Voi. I'll hand it over. Yeah, a round of applause for Voi and for Matthias.